It's Sunday, January 14, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is a filmmaker, commentator, strategist, and national correspondent for Courier Newsroom, Allan Piper. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
Allan, you put out a video that went viral just a week or so ago that explained Project 2025, which is something that we have talked about here on this show for many months. And people write to me all the time and they're like, can you kind of do a deep dive on that subject? Because I think people don't quite know what it is. You know, they've taken a look at it, but it's 960 pages. And so I've asked you here, with the benefit of your expertise and your ability to kind of communicate on this subject, to help me try and disseminate some of the myths and get our heads around what this really is. And for those that don't know, this is a document that anybody can download that the Heritage Foundation have created that is basically a plan for the deconstruction of the administrative state if Donald Trump or another GOP candidate was to win the general election in November.
How is it being funded?
Sure. Well, just a little bit about me is I am formerly in the Trump administration at the Office of Personnel Management. I was chief of staff and White House liaison. Before that, I had served with Dr. Carson at HUD, but I really am a Washington outsider. I'm an attorney who's practiced in New York and came to Washington interested in politics, but very hard to break in. I came to lead this project at the Heritage Foundation because we're about bringing outsiders into Washington. This is really a plan for conservatives to be ready to hit the ground running day one, January 20th, 2025. And what we're inviting is a whole new group of Americans and inspiring them to come to Washington and serve. This is really the pathway. We've lined up what we believe in a policy book. We are recruiting people into a database. We're training people to tell them how the federal government functions and how they should function in government. And finally, we are drafting transition plans, all with a mind to advance the conservative agenda in 2025.
Would you say that's a fair assessment of how it all starts?
Yes, that is, and I would also say I believe the AP headline was. I just want to actually pull it up because I thought that I was very struck by the fact that it was neither an exaggeration nor a downplaying. The AP called it. Their headline was "Conservative Groups Draw Up Plan to Dismantle the U.S. Government and Replace it with Trump's Vision," and that really is what the plan is. They are careful to phrase it as a plan for whoever the next conservative president is. It's not specifically for Trump, but it has been drafted by Trump allies. The head of the project is a former Trump staffer, and much of it has been drafted by members of the last Trump administration. So it is clearly intended for his use. And it is intended to address the problem that while a lot happened in Trump's first term, in terms of achieving his policy goals, he was not able to do much because it was not a very organized or strategic administration. And this is a plan drawn up so that he can be much more effective in achieving his policy goals. And so that there will be a plan available to him, or as they say, whoever the next conservative president is on day one.
Because he's not smart enough to come up with this stuff himself. I mean, this is part of the issue, isn't it? And when he makes these little videos that get put out on Truth Social, he's reading from a teleprompter. And, there are people behind the scenes, Stephen Miller, for example, who write the Hitler quotes into the speeches, and Trump says it, and he's a performance artist. So for him, it's all about him, and it's all about how he comes over, and it's all about winning. But behind that is a very organized machine of far-right Christian nationalists who are determined to rebuild the United States in Donald Trump's image, or whoever else, as you say. And just to kind of highlight some of these things, obviously they want to get their fingers into the judiciary, which they already have to a certain extent with the Supreme Court. But the dismantling of the FBI, you won't be allowed to identify as gay, or any references to LGBTQ plus people will be, become a crime, and it's very likely that you also won't be able to vote, as we currently do, because this is a very big part of the rise of fascism, is that once the fascist gets their dictatorship, they then prevent people from democratically voting them out.
Well, this is definitely a plan that is drafted with the idea that it is a way to work around needing to involve Congress. And that's something that's very striking about this plan, because it does offer legislative suggestions, but for the most part, these are administrative suggestions. And this is a plan that is based on a version of the unitary executive theory, which is the idea that the president and the executive branch have more sweeping authority than they have traditionally been seen to have. And it is also based very much around dismantling the civil service. Now, when people talk about government, people of all political stripes love to rail against government and bureaucrats, and they have this image of people in gray suits and fluorescently lit hallways, and it's very bleak. But the fact of the matter is, these government workers that conservatives like to rail against and call the deep state are 2 million hardworking civilian Americans all over the country. Whoever you watching are, if it's not you, it's surely some of your neighbors. And for the most part, these jobs aren't political jobs. Government and politics aren't always the same thing. We have scientists at scientific agencies. We have analysts at the IRS. We have doctors at the FDA. And it's very important that we staff agencies with people who are just good at doing the job. And one of the things that Trump did in near the end of 2020 that he never got to fully act on, by the end of his first term, he had come to realize that that if he could purge the government of everyone who wasn't one of his lackeys, he could get more of what he wanted done, and he could consolidate power. So in October of 2020, he, by executive order, reclassified about 50,000 federal employees who would not typically be let go by the president, to be able to fire them and replace them with loyalists. And the plan with this is to act upon that, to act upon the plan that Trump didn't get a chance to do in his first term, and to start the second term that way. So all of these people who are just experts in their fields, showing up, doing their jobs, it doesn't matter who's president, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, he's looking to fire them and replace them with people who will be acting specifically on the policy agenda and the vision of the next conservative president.
Which extends to immigration, but also things like Social Security. So
Yes.
If you rely on Social Security checks, you might not get those anymore. I mean, we're already hearing about how Republicans want to do away with Medicare and Social Security, and also the Affordable Care Act, which they plan to remove and replace, but not replace. So the problem, though, Allan, is that we are in a situation when nobody of any political stripe really likes government diktat. It's like people are always annoyed, or, I have to pay my tax, or I have to, or they don't fix the roads, or, there is a natural desire to kind of moan against the authorities, parking restrictions or anything, right? And the problem is that when Donald Trump shows up and says, I'm going to do away with the deep state, the administrative state, or the state, some people who even might be liberal in their thinking might be like, yeah, I mean, maybe it's time for a change. And that is my concern, is that, this is being presented in such a way that it is entirely necessary. They don't present it as a Christian nationalist thing. They don't present it as an anti-LGBTQ thing. You have to get into the weeds of the paperwork to realize what this really is. Do you think that there is a danger that this could actually, in terms of the vote, tap into people's frustration with the administrative state over decades?
Well, it's possible. Trump is very good at playing on people's frustrations, and it's striking. He's very good at playing on people's frustrations. He's not historically good at resolving the issues that have frustrated them, but he is good at mobilizing people around feeling frustrated. And part of what makes it easier for conservatives to make their case, if their case is government doesn't work, all they have to do to win their case is to stop government from working. And we see that with these near government shutdowns. We see that with the inability of Congress to pass legislation. And so people see government not working, and they tend to say, oh, well, then the people who say it doesn't work must be right, rather than, no, it's being stopped up by those people. It actually can do the things that you look to government to do. But you're very right that this is not just about shrinking the size of government. It is about making the government a tool for a specific ideological agenda, and it is very much a white Christian nationalist agenda, and that is fairly explicitly stated in the document. Something I quoted in the video was on page 5 of the document. It said specifically that pornography should be outlawed, the people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned, educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. Now, even if we were talking about actual pornography, that would be an extreme statement. I don't think most Americans would agree that they should be locked up for having or pornography. But as it becomes very quickly clear in the document, their definition of pornography is not what most people think of. It is merely acknowledging the existence of LGBTQ Americans. And so we have a situation where the framers of this plan believe that some people, some Americans, are by their sheer identity not suitable to exist in public. And the plan very specifically works towards that end. On page 451, which is a section about how to restructure the Department of Health and Human Services, it says, quote, families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. So anyone who does not fall within that definition is, by that definition, specifically excluded from that.
Sorry, are you reading from Mein Kampf there? I just want to check the document.
I am reading from, it's interesting, and I'm offering page citations. That is on page 451 of the document. It has been interesting to see the video that I made. I see some trolls getting on and they say, "Oh yeah, well, where does it say that?" I said, well, I give you a page number in the video. Right. You can go to their website, project2025.org. You can download it for yourself. I was really struck that also in the section on how to restructure health and human services, it says that married men and women are the ideal natural family structure. And it also goes on to say, all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. So even straight couples who are seeking to adopt are being classed as outside of their vision. It's very much a eugenic vision.
Right. Which is something that Trump has been very into, this idea of the great replacement theory and eugenics, and he's talked about people having good genes, and none of this happens by accident, does it, Alan? It's like this is the culmination of all of these. They're not even conspiracy theories. These are the extreme thoughts of the people in the shadows, who kept their mouths shut for a while during Barack Obama's tenure as president, even though it completely appalled them that there was a black man in a White House. And yet, they were there behind the scenes typing this stuff up and preparing for the uprising. And now Trump has got this kind of messiah complex going on. This whole thing has become something that is, at the very least, dystopian. But as you read from those words, it is Nazi propaganda of the 1930s.
And I try to be very hesitant about using words like that, because historically people have overused comparisons to Nazis, and it makes, there's a danger that someone sounds hysterical just for saying that, except when you have someone who is using the actual words. And this specific idea of ethnic purity, the idea that Trump is getting to when he says, and his actual words are that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, that is a specific ethno-national idea that goes beyond mere authoritarianism to being a defining attribute of actual fascism. And so it is, before we started recording, you and I were talking about how I think a lot of conventional media are ill-prepared for this moment. And they're ill-prepared for a lot of reasons, because responsible journalists have deeply ingrained it in themselves not to over-exaggerate a threat, not to compare someone to Hitler, but it has become so ingrained that when someone is using the actual literal quotes from Hitler, they tend to want to brush past it. The first time that Trump in a speech referred to his opponents as vermin, that did not even appear on the front page of the New York Times or Washington Post the next day. It was just sort of treated as another bump on the campaign trail. But it's really not. We have to pay attention to this.
And let's remember that Hitler was voted in legitimately.
Yes.
And this is often the way with fascists, is that they skulk in under the radar with a different form of presentation. And once they get elected, that's when the floodgates open.
Yes.
And, I was just going to say,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I'm seeing that with Mike Johnson now, the new Speaker of the House, who is a far-right Christian nationalist insurrectionist, who is having to kind of play a long game. Because I have no doubt that Project 2025 is that is his dream. But he's having to kind of, agree to these continuing resolutions and just play along a little, because it's like the Trojan horse. Let's get them inside, and then we'll do the big reveal.
Well, and I think one of the things that's been frustrating about the coverage of Mike Johnson is that because Mike Johnson is mild-mannered, that is reported on as being moderate. He does not yell the way Trump does. He does not make a scene. He looks like Clark Kent, but his positions are very extreme. And so treating him as a moderate or referring to him as a more moderate alternative has really been a misrepresentation by a lot of mainstream media.
And it is the media time and time again that are dropping the ball on this. And why is that? I mean, maybe we should just ask ourselves quickly why, with Project 2025 printed, available, they're recruiting, and I'll talk about the recruitment side in just a moment, but they're not hiding any of this. You can, as you said, you can download it, you can digest it, as exhausting and offensive as it is. So why is the mainstream media not really talking about it? Why is it not plastered on the front pages every single day, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a real fear on the part of the media of appearing biased. And I think that most media outlets are so afraid of appearing to be biased that they do not want to report on the actual words of Trump and his allies, because doing so seems like the words are so extreme that reporting on them seems like a smear, seems like something they could be criticized of being biased for.
That in itself is so sad, isn't it? Because it's not journalism. Journalism isn't both sides, right? Journalism is fact finding and reporting on those facts, and these are the facts. And this is how, because of the removal of the fairness doctrine under Reagan and the whole history of it, as we know, with the media, Roger Ailes, and we know the timeline. But we're at a point now where the media are going to drop the ball on Adolf Hitler 2.0 because they don't want to appear biased and be criticized for it.
I think there's a real risk of that. And maybe on some level it's not even fear of how they will appear. It's almost doubting what they're seeing. A level at which, he can't possibly, when they talk about creating mass internment camps and rounding up 18 million people was what Trump at his last town hall said that he
probably myself included, actually. I mean, that's the other thing to bear in mind, going after immigrants, but also after journalists that don't report on them the way they want to be reported on.
I think when people see this, they think, well, he can't actually mean that. It can't really be that. And that's why it's so important. It's so important to see what he's actually saying. And in the case of Project 2025, to go and read the words that are there. And Project 2025 is very explicit about what it wants to do. There are several main avenues that they're pursuing. There is a strong anti-LGBTQ element throughout, very much demonizing trans people, as if trans people were somehow a threat to the public. There is a very strong anti-immigrant theme. There is a general theme to make life more expensive for working people and less expensive for wealthy people. There's an extensive anti-environment theme. The
gutting of the EPA and
yes,
and also disbelieving in climate change, which is something I wanted to talk about later. But I mean, the US is the second biggest polluter on the planet, and this new administration would want to ignore any threat of climate change.
Yes. In fact, the plans in here would not only make it impossible for the administration under Trump to do anything to fight climate change, but would make it very difficult for any future administration to do so. They want to disband the entire agency that has been monitoring climate and collecting data for over 30 years. Presumably that data would exist somewhere, but it would no longer exist within the federal government. and it would not be easy to rebuild that infrastructure. But the made-up crisis that is enabling a lot of this is the framing of immigration as an invasion. And what I think is one of the most striking things in this plan is the changing of immigration policy to be more of a wartime policy. Both in this plan and Trump publicly in his speeches have put forward the idea of deploying the U.S. military within the U.S. to conduct raids. There is a plan to detain. Trump at the town hall said that the number he was going for was 18 million people, place them into mass detention camps while their fate is decided, and then ultimately deport them. In this effort of prioritizing a war against an imagined invasion, we have the U.S. military deployed within the U.S. Local police enforcement would be deputized to act as immigration enforcement. Now, we already have been trying to come to terms with a problem in America of the overreach of law enforcement, and this plan would seek to let the Derek Chauvins and Joe Arpaios of the world decide that anyone that they perceived to be possibly an undocumented immigrant would be subject to their own enforcement. Joe Arpaio attempted to in Arizona. He ran a show me your papers policy where people could be pulled over, detained simply on the suspicion of being undocumented immigrants. And of course, they don't want to frame it as being specifically a racial thing, but how is someone under suspicion of being an undocumented immigrant unless it is some visual descriptor that would enable these officers to look at a person and say, oh, I suspect that person is maybe coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. And much of that would also lead to vigilantism as well.
Yes.
Because people would feel that they were on, Team Trump, MAGA Republicans, and that it would be their job to police the country. And then we'll see situations like the lynching of Arnold Arbery, for example, who was murdered on the side of the road by three, white men who just thought that they were doing good work by picking him up. I mean, this is the tragedy, isn't it? That we're in a situation now where America is at a crisis point in terms of a junction, democracy versus dictatorship, I call it. And I still think that despite us ringing the bell and trying to sound the alarm, the way that Project 2025, which is just one example of this, the wider mindset of MAGA Republicans, that it is still very hard for people to digest that this could happen in America, the land of the free, the country built by slaves and immigrants, a country that has prospered and made people extremely rich, invariably white people, but this is tragically the American story, and that this kind of winding back the clock 50, 60, 70 years couldn't happen here because we're already too progressive in many ways. How do we deal with that? The fact that if it's American exceptionalism maybe that kicks in, where people are like, this could never happen in America, and yet it does. I mean, you could argue that in 2016 we took for granted that Hillary Clinton would win the election, and again, it could never happen in America that someone like Donald Trump could win, and yet he did, with the help from the Russians, as we know, and with help from social media campaigns and various other things. But, he did, stained the history forever, really. I mean, it'll be an entire generation or two before, Trumpism is eradicated. How do we kind of get through to people that this is to be taken seriously?
Well, I think we just have to keep calling attention to it. I have great faith in Americans, and I especially have great faith in young Americans. We had record youth turnout in the 2018 midterms, record youth turnout in 2020, near record youth turnout in the 2022 midterms, and I do think that if young people are really aware of the stakes, I feel that the younger generations are have a healthier, more inclusive view of the world. I think that the more xenophobic elements of Trumpism are things that the younger generations want to reject fully. And so I think that if young voters show up in great numbers to specifically repudiate this white Christian nationalist agenda, I think there's a real ability to do that. And what those of us who report on what's happening, it's just incumbent upon us to report on it accurately and let people know what the real stakes are.
I would agree with you. I have a lot of optimism for the youth vote, but statistically, older people are the ones who've got the time to vote, or they make more effort to vote, or they because they've done it so many times before, and then there's also those issues of hereditary voting where people just do what they've always done or what their parents have done, and I think that moving the needle on this is about looking outside of the US to get a sense of what is happening in the world and what the world really looks like. Because, this Project 2025 document does not look like any other country that I recognize. I mean, it's more extreme even than Russia in some ways. And, I don't think because we know people tend not to travel outside of the US and understanding other cultures and other nations and how other countries do it is not often a topic of conversation here. It's like America is king. And for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to have traveled or even migrated, which I recommend to everybody, mass exodus from the US, don't go to England. That's my advice. But I get a sense that people, because of social media and Insta Reels and, TikTok and looking at other people who don't look like you, having a good time in other countries, experiencing life and sharing their lives in other countries, that is a new thing to people and to voters, really the last few years. And my hope is that this very insular America First attitude will be dented because people are naturally inquisitive and that they see that there is a greater sense of a progressive nature, more integrated societies outside of the US.
I hope so. I have great faith in American people. I believe I live in New York, a city that in many ways is sort of the epitome of the American multicultural immigrant melting pot. Our symbol is Lady Liberty, welcoming the tired and the poor and the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. A symbol that Stephen Miller, one of the architects of the Project 2025 plan, derided when he was in the White House. I have faith that American people will reject a white nationalist agenda if they see that that's what it really is, and that's why.
That's the point, though, isn't it? Yes. If they know that that's what it is, because it is not being dressed up like that. We are reading between the lines, or in fact, reading the lines of a document that is presented in a very corporate fashion. And people typically vote for personality over policy. They don't download the policy documents. They don't take the time to read it, not because they're stupid, but because they don't have the time, because they're too busy working to try and make a living.
Yeah.
And I recognize that it is for people like us to expose it. We need to take a quick pause for our sponsor, but I want to come back and talk about the people behind this document, who they are, and what their agenda is. So thank you for the moment, but we shall return with Allan Piper here on The Weekend Show.
10 seconds on the clock. How many things can you name that are always growing? Your relationships, your skills, your customer base? How about businesses on Shopify? When we started podcasting, an online store was the furthest thing from our minds. Now we're selling t-shirts and Midas Touch merch, and it's so easy, all because we use Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business, from the launch of your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the "did we just hit 1 million orders" stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're delivering daily digests or serving sensational scoops, Shopify will help you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person point-of-sale system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds and Rothney's and Brooklinen and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's extensive help resources are there to support your success at every step of the way, because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/weekend. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear. And when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort.
We're back on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. We're joined by Allan Piper from Courier Newsroom. Allan, the Heritage Foundation is the organization that has published Project 2025. They're behind the website and the documents and the various aspects of it. But there's also around 40 advocacy groups that have also contributed to this document, that have the same thinking. And I think these are the types of organizations that exist in the shadows, right? These are lobby groups. These are think tanks. And the Heritage Foundation on their own website, they boast about the fact that they, in 2021 alone, they had 400 meetings with congressional staff, 120 meetings with members of Congress, 47 candidate briefings, 168 working group events on Capitol Hill, 80 Heritage alumni serving on Capitol Hill, and 30 congressional testimonies. I mean, these types of groups are very much integrated into the bubble on Capitol Hill. And most of us, I mean, I've never even been to DC, but most of us are not in that world, right? I recognize that people need to kind of know that the people that are walking the halls of Congress are not just candidates that they voted for, but are often the very people that are behind a document to, eradicate the state as we know it.
Yes, and we know that Trump himself is very receptive to documents that are prepared for him by groups like this. Let's not forget that his one of his most far-reaching achievements as president is the number of federal judges that he appointed, a third of the Supreme Court, and a record number of federal judges throughout the federal judiciary. And he was working off of lists provided to him by organizations like the ones behind Project 2025. He was not drawing up his own lists. And so in that same way, we have every reason to expect that the agenda laid out in this document is something that he will readily seek to implement, because this suits the interests that he has been campaigning on and obsessing over since leaving office. Right.
Well, because they're doing the work for him, effectively.
Yes.
I mean, because him making a list would consist of a quarter pounder with cheese and a large fries and a Diet Coke. And so, that is the extent of his contribution other than the performance art. But something needs to be written on the teleprompter, right? He, in a kind of Ron Burgundy style, he needs to be given the material to work with, because when he's riffing, it's all just grievances, but he would never riff about policy. And so policy has to come from somewhere. And invariably it's left to the academics and the thinkers. And, there are plenty of those people on the right and the far right. And some of them are very eloquent. I mean, Steve Bannon is one of them. He is a very intelligent, very eloquent man. Admittedly, he wears 2 shirts and 3 jackets and 6 pens. But, we shouldn't be distracted by the fact that he was the guy at the very beginning that said he wanted to cause chaos, and he was the one that wanted to kind of bring down the administrative state, working alongside Donald Trump. And even since being ousted, he uses his podcast, his War Room podcast, to communicate with Trump people and even with the man himself.
Yes. And so the beginning pages of the document list all of the people involved, and it really
the contributors.
Yes, it really is.
It's a who's who.
It is. It's a who's who of right-wing organizations.
Yeah.
The organizations involved have been backers of Trump, his allies. The actual authors and advisors of the paper include his former staffers, and so this is very much his circle that are creating this for his use.
And something very interesting I thought when I looked at that list of contributors was they've done something very clever, which, the pro-life movement has done as well by branding themselves pro-life rather than anti-abortion, for example, is that they give themselves these names that would make the average Joe think that they are doing good. And I'll reel off a few. So, for example, There is the American Center for Law and Justice that is listed. There is the Center for Equal Opportunity, or the Center for Family and Human Rights, the Center for Immigration Studies. I mean, these types of organizations sound like they are there for the right reasons, but it's only when you dig a little deeper. And the sheer number of them as well, Alan. I mean, this is the other thing, is there is no shortage of organizations that are lobbying Congress, seeking to make life very difficult for anybody who is not white and Christian nationalist, I should say, and cisgender, who is married to somebody of the opposite sex and has 2 children and a Labrador.
Yes, it is. Well, they've done a great job of selecting names. That is, that's for sure.
First Liberty Institute. I mean, using liberty and freedom has been a theme of the right, hasn't it?
Yes.
And yet, you would argue that for those of us who've studied this document, it is anything but about freedom. In fact, it's the opposite of freedom. So, could we just talk about how the word freedom in this context has been corrupted?
Well, this is very much about stripping freedoms from a lot of people. And something else that is striking is tied to that freedom idea. Conservatives have historically advocated for state rights, and that is, and even with the abortion, they've said, well, it should be left up to the states. But this plan really lays out plans to take away the rights of certain states. Something that Trump has spoken about increasingly openly is his desire to overrule the state governments of states that he does not like. And in the section on the Department of Justice in this document, it gets into the plans of how the Justice Department, first off, they're looking to fully gut the Justice Department as it exists, which includes shutting down all investigations and prosecutions that are seen to be illegitimate. That they did not go so far as to specifically say shut down the prosecutions of Trump, but that is clearly the intention. But they have all right. Around page 5, the Department of Justice section starts on page 545. And to me, that's where some of this gets the most chilling. The FBI director has traditionally been a 10-year position, and the idea is that it would be longer than 2 terms of a president, so it would not be someone that the president hires and fires. The FBI director would not be working for the president. It was shocking when Trump fired the FBI director who was over an investigation into him. And here, the plan is specifically to make the FBI director and a political appointee, make him directly answerable to the president. And then on page 553, it says that the Department of Justice should take over law enforcement in cities and states where they feel it is not being done sufficiently. Now, I live in New York City. I know that there are all over the country. Everyone wants to be safe. There are always concerns about crime. Crime does exist. But the former president has falsely said that our city is a burning hellhole, and you walk down the street and you get shot. That's not true. But under what is being laid out on page 553, he's saying that the Justice Department could step in and take over. So instead of he's saying, well, Alvin Bragg's prosecuting me instead of prosecuting murderers. So let's just replace him with my guy. Send in the FBI, send in the Department of Justice, and take over New York City. Page 553 says that prosecutors who are not conducting the type of prosecutions that the president wants should be prosecuted. So we're talking about someone like Alvin Bragg, someone like Fani Willis,
Letitia James.
Letitia James could be arrested and prosecuted because they're not focusing on what the president wants them to be focusing on. Another rather alarming part, this is on page 562, it says that the Department of Justice should use the full force of federal prosecutorial resources to stop state and local governments from enacting diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Now, this is part of what barely constitutes a dog whistle. Their attacks on DEI, as they call it, is basically the idea that there is too much diversity, that there should be that no government agencies should be taking diversity into account when hiring, and the idea that the Justice Department could prosecute, say, a mayor if they think that a mayor has too much diversity on their staff. Well, how do they know? How do they know the decision-making choices that have been made? Ultimately, the problem is not. Ultimately, they're saying you can't have too much diversity.
But a lot of it goes back to racism, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I've tried very hard on this show over the last couple of years to, explore other explanations for situations in the US. And when I get to the door and open it, it always says racism in there. And this is very frustrating because, again, other countries have their problems, but they don't have the discrimination at anything like the level here in the US, with black people being shot by the police indiscriminately, invariably in the back while they're running away. And there still being this, despite all of the effort of the civil rights movement and everything else, there's still being this huge disparity between the white man and the black community. That there is also a piece, I think it's on page, I love the fact that you and I, this is like we're doing like study together in the halls of a university. On page 550, I wanted to talk about the FBI a little bit. They have written in bold, prohibit the FBI from engaging in general in activities related to combating the spread of so-called misinformation and disinformation by Americans who are not tied to any plausible criminal activity. So, everything that we have highlighted and continue to highlight here, it's not new. This stuff happened before. This stuff has happened in, whether it be in nations that have now recovered, and there are many. You would say that fascist dictators, the one thing they have in common is they have all fallen. So they do not remain. The people invariably rise up against the fascists. But this is the playbook of typical and traditional fascism. It is not new. It is not a new version. It will look different and sound different in America because the man bringing the message is Donald Trump, a former reality TV show star who prior to that was a failed businessman. So it looks different to it being, say, General Pinochet, who did not look like a star of a reality TV show. Ironically, looked exactly like my grandfather, but that's another story. So I do get a sense that is why people, again, can't really connect with the extreme aspects of this, is because the delivery is being done in kind of quite a jovial way. Donald Trump is a clown, a performance that is, it's addictive. And this is why people criticize Joe Biden, because he is not the performer and he is older and aging differently. But politics should be boring and politics should be old and it should be, rooted in seriousness. Yeah, and maybe that is the difference here.
Yeah, we can't forget that in 2016, Donald Trump was it's very typical for presidential candidates to make an appearance on SNL. He was brought in to host SNL for an episode because he was seen as an entertainer. And so it is very dangerous when far right white nationalist ideas are presented under the guise of entertainment.
And that really kind of ties into the American story, doesn't it? You know, because the lack of kings and queens and the history that I'm used to coming from England and Europe, the megastars of America are the Frank Sinatras, right? The movie stars and the great performers, and so much of popular culture here is about these people. And Donald Trump has very much fit into that, you know, that duality between straddling politics and popular culture. And I do think that that's why in 2016, a lot of people gave him a chance because they thought, well, maybe we'll see how this goes. But, you know, back then he wasn't expecting to win. Whereas this time around, there is an expectation that he should win because he thinks, I mean, he gave an example the other day that he was driving around Florida somewhere, and you know, wherever he went there were Trump supporters. I mean, that was his qualitative market research for the fact that he's popular right now. But you know, I too have faith in the American people to know that they don't want to live in a dystopian universe that is underwritten by the Nazi Party.
It is very easy, I think, for people to block out what happened in the previous administration. It's particularly we had trauma after trauma after trauma. I thought that during the stretch of family separation, children being ripped away from their parents with no plan to ever reconnect them, not even the same level of tracking that you'd have for a checked bag at an airport. Just no way, no system in place to ever reconnect. I thought that was as bad as it could get. And then we had the mishandling of the pandemic, where potentially hundreds of thousands of people died needlessly because of the lack of any national plan, and because we had a leader who was consistently telling us that the disease would go away on its own. And then we saw democracy itself come within a hair's breadth of being overturned as people stormed the Capitol, set up a hangman's noose, and came with very real intentions to murder elected officials who got in the way of what they wanted. This is so much horror in such a short period of time that in the same way that a lot of people I know have kind of just blocked out COVID, just as a thing, just blocked it out. Like I'm not going to think about the fact that there was a stretch of time when I was afraid to leave my home. I'm not going to think about the fact that there were 11 freezer trucks full of an overflow of dead bodies at the hospital. That was the flu or something. We've moved on. In the same way, I think there's a real tendency to block out January 6th, to block out the Muslim ban, to block out everything that was, to block out embracing the Proud Boys and the very fine
the
people
Oath Keepers
at Charlottesville.
And the one I reference a lot in Portland was the disappearance of peaceful protesters by the military who were not identified. They were an arm of the military that we have never seen before. They were Donald Trump's army, and they were disappearing them not in military vehicles or police cars, but in unmarked vehicles. That to me was a sign, along with the Lafayette Square stuff, with the Bible and the buzzing with the military helicopter of the crowd and the gassing of the crowd, That is what I remember. The shops boarded up because of the National Guard being on the street and the fear of protest. The fear of protest from the Trump administration, incidentally. You know, they were terrified. They built a wall around the White House, you may remember. And that is a sign that, you know, the people have the power, ultimately. There is more of us than there are of them. But, Allan, this document does do something positive in my mind. And that is that the fact that so many people have put their name to it, so many organizations have put their name to it, are proud of it, because it's very beautifully presented, very corporate fashion, nicely laid out. The website is very upscale. You know, it doesn't look like a kind of a QAnon deep web website or anything. You know, it's up there with ExxonMobil as an example. But what it does is it nails people's colors to the mast. It basically is saying these organizations, these groups and these individuals who claim to be the leadership and the contributors to this document are extremists. They hate the LGBTQ plus community. They hate immigrants. They hate people who are not white or cisgender. They don't care for the administrative state to keep us safe. They don't believe in climate change. They care nothing for the FBI or the judiciary as it stands. It is basically a historical, or will become a historical document, where instead of it being a kind of underground textbook and training manual, it's actually a moment in time where they are saying, this is who we are, and this is what we want America to look like.
Yes, it is. And I hope that everyone reads it and takes it seriously. Okay, it's hundreds of pages. It's a difficult commitment to ask people to read the whole thing, which is part of why it's important for people like us to call attention to the things that are in it. But I think you've highlighted what's good about this. I think that it is a good thing that this is out in public, that anyone can go to their site, anyone can download this, anyone can read it. If you don't think that there's going to be another more bans against total bans against certain countries from coming here, you can go to page 152 and read that yourself. If you don't believe that they really want to slash school lunch programs, you can go to page 302 and read that for yourself. So they have done us a great service by putting it out publicly.
All in one place.
All in one place. And I would just say to anyone who says, well, these are exaggerations, when Trump says that he's going to have his political opponents prosecuted, when he says that he's going to round up 18 million people and put them in camps, those are just exaggerations. He's not going to do those things. I would say when those of us who were pointing out the things he was saying in 2016 pointed them out, people said, "Oh, he won't do that." He said, "We're going to have a Muslim ban," and people said, "Well, he's exaggerating. He can't do that." Well, he did. He did do that. He said that he was going to weaponize immigration policy. And people said, "Oh, well, don't." He's exaggerating, and we saw that he did that.
Yeah.
And
they were in campaign speeches. That was before he got elected. He was making these claims in campaign speeches, saying the American dream is dead and I alone can fix it. And with that, people should have been very alarmed. But there is a sense that because it's Donald Trump saying it, that they're just watching an extension of an entertainment program, like the behind the scenes of The Apprentice episode type of thing. But actually, this matters. I mean, leadership is essential, especially in a country of 330 million people, and in a country as diverse as the United States.
And he did. He says that he keeps his promises, and the most extreme things that he said he would do, He attempted to do all of them. And any that he fell short of, it was because he lacked the organization and discipline to actually do it.
Right.
With this plan, the organization and discipline has been laid out for him. He will do the things he says he's going to do, and he will be much more effective at doing them from the experience of his first term. And so anyone who doesn't want to see the immigration policy weaponized against 18 million people, anyone who doesn't want to see the FBI become his personal police force and come into cities, blue cities and states, and take them over and arrest their prosecutors so that blue cities can be run under Trump's vision. Anyone who doesn't want to see that should be alarmed by the specific plans to accomplish that in this document.
And the other thing we should say is that, it's all very well him claiming that this is what will happen, but Americans don't go quietly. So prosecutors are not just going to be like, okay, arrest me, you got me. They're not. They're going to fight back. Communities will fight back. There will be chaos ensuing. There will be mass protests and likely violence. And it will become as chaotic as Donald Trump's previous 4 years, but only worse. Partly because they have a recruitment program in place as well, which is part of this project2025.org.
Oh,
they're
yes.
calling it they're calling it the Presidential Administration Academy. They say it's a one-of-a-kind educational and skill-building program designed to prepare and equip future political appointees now to be ready on day one of the next conservative administration. This academy provides aspiring appointees with the insight, background knowledge, and expertise in governance to immediately begin rolling back destructive policy and advancing conservative ideas in the federal government. Again, not trying to hide it, trying to get people to sign up, trying to get people to come to the faculty. They say that you'll learn from a distinguished roster of former political appointees from 4 previous presidential administrations. I mean, this is a very well-organized group who are wanting to take the dispossessed, people who might not have a job, and be like, well, here's a job, here's my calling to actually, in the same way that January 6 mobsters felt like it was their duty to do this for their president, to take back their country. I'm sure that people will fall for this recruitment drive too.
And it is vetting people specifically on their loyalty to the MAGA agenda. Right now, if you want to get a job at the FDA, you should have, they're evaluating you based on, are you a doctor or a medical researcher or a scientist? And let's look at your qualifications. But if the central qualification becomes ideological, that's a problem for agencies that should be inherently unideological. We want scientists at scientific agencies. We want engineers at analyzing public safety, and we want and public transportation. It shouldn't be an ideological litmus test, which is alarming. Also, in addition to recruiting the people to work in these jobs, there's very much an effort to continue to tell groups like the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. The section on the Department of Homeland Security is, I think, one of the most, which begins on page 133, is, I think, one of the most alarming overall sections in the document. And part of it is actually seeks to disband the Department of Homeland Security altogether and replace it with a new border security agency. And that does several things, one of which is it makes Homeland Security specifically and only about the border, which means that Homeland Security has recognized in recent years that the greatest terror threat within the U.S. is domestic extremism. And by getting rid of DHS and replacing it with an agency that is focused only on the border and only on external threats, that means that specifically there is no longer an anti-terrorism agency combating domestic terrorists. This is an invitation to domestic terrorists. Also, later on in the section on the Department of Justice, it specifically gets into having, yes, on page 552, it seeks to have the FBI stop policing conservative groups. Then on page 558, it specifically says that the Department of Justice should stop enforcing safety zones around places where people get abortions, so that basically they're giving the stand-by sign to any domestic extremist group that wants to become the civilian paramilitary for the MAGA agenda.
Well, they're offering them training as well. I mean, that's the other thing, aren't they? Which will legitimize the vigilante, or legitimize the kind of, the lone gunman, because, we've seen that time and time again, that invariably people that choose to take the law into their own hands have been motivated to do so by right-wing media or by Donald Trump directly, because of fear-mongering and claiming that, immigration is the problem, when in fact immigration is the reason that we're all here. And I find it very interesting because, the US, considering that we've just been through a 3-year pandemic, is actually in a pretty good place. And Joe Biden has been one of the most effectual presidents for since forever, you could argue, considering what he's had to face. And I think that, aside from the economy doing great and job numbers looking really good and people starting to kind of feel like things are changing for the better, the messaging from the Democrats is still a little elusive. And that, really the problem is that often the right wing are very good at making a lot of noise, making websites, doing the documents, getting people together, doing the lobbying, creating the faux outrage and the drama. And the Democrats kind of just rely on the fact that, well, everything will work itself out and, the cream always rises to the top. But actually, the fight here is going to have to be much more explicit, in my view. I fear that Democrats are kind of coming to a knife fight armed with spoons.
Well, I think that one of the main problems that the Democrats and progressive messengers in general have is because the facts are generally on their side, they think that facts will prevail. And human psychology makes us all more motivated by emotion than facts. And conservatives have generally not had the facts on their side. And I guess because they haven't had the luxury of facts, they've gotten better as well. If we don't have the facts, what we have? We can get people all worked up. And so they've gotten better at managing people's emotions. And
which is very lucrative.
Yes. Now, I'm not advocating that anyone get away from the facts. I do not advocate that. I would like everything we do to be fact-based, everything everybody does to be fact-based. But people trying to win political arguments who have the facts on their side need to know that the facts alone are not enough. You need to communicate to people on an emotional level, and that's difficult. And it is also, you highlighted the fact that that President Biden has had remarkable successes. I think in the same way, the journalists are afraid to When Trump says something absolutely incoherent and unhinged, they're afraid to comment on that for fear of appearing partisan. In the same way, I think journalists feel afraid to acknowledge President Biden's successes because they feel that that would appear partisan, even though by sheer objective metrics, this president has been remarkably successful. When you consider that when he was sworn into office, 3,000 Americans were dying of COVID every single day. That was a 9/11 scale mass casualty event every day. And a vaccine existed, but it was not available to almost anyone because the previous president was more focused on overturning an election than coming up with a vaccine rollout policy. I believe it was roughly 1 million vaccines had been, he had set a goal of 1 million vaccines by the end of 2020 and came nowhere near it. At the pace of vaccination that was happening at the end of Trump's term, it would have taken over a decade for the vaccine to be widely available to Americans. But within a matter of months, because President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act, he set up mass vaccination centers. Within months, every American who wanted a vaccine was able to get one. And it's only because of that that people were able to go back to jobs and go back to restaurants and start living, and the economy started moving. If he had accomplished nothing other than that, that would have been a historic accomplishment. But then on top of that, you have 14 million jobs created in his first term, more than under any president's single term. And some people say, oh, well, those are just the pandemic recession jobs coming back. No, it's more jobs than had been lost have been created. We are seeing rising wages. We are seeing a greater pro-labor activity from an administration than we have seen maybe since Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know. We're seeing antitrust enforcement, which had really gone by the wayside for the last several decades. So obviously, it's not a perfect administration. None are, and journalists should highlight and point out the mistakes, but they should also point out these objective successes.
Yeah. The fundamental difference between the conservative or MAGA Republican thinking and the Democrats and progressive thought is this difference of opinion on regulation. I just want to kind of finish with this because, of how important it is. The Republicans claim that, everything should be deregulated. Let the market be free, just, deregulate it, let it all work. It'll work itself out. And they claim that Democrats have like the opposing view that everything should be locked down and regulated. And that simply isn't true because, we live in a capitalist country and capitalist society and no one plans on rolling that back. It's too far gone anyway. But if you deregulate, say, the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, and your water supply gets poisoned, which is something that Donald Trump was, very much did. The amount of deregulation of the EPA during his presidency was unprecedented and so dangerous. Even withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. I mean, he did that straight away. The Iran nuclear deal. He didn't read these things before he pulled away from them, but he just wanted to undo anything that Barack Obama had done. So I think it's just important to remind people that regulation is important for maintaining a civil and safe society. And I think sometimes a lot of that gets lost in translation.
Absolutely. I mean, you get into around page 363 in the document when you get into the Department of Energy. The plan is to reduce nuclear power regulations and privatize nuclear waste disposal. Now,
Right.
when you privatize something, when private for-profit companies are in charge of something, their main concern is going to be what's profitable. And there are some things that are more important than profit. I certainly don't think that when you're dealing with nuclear waste, that the goal should be, well, what's the cheapest solution? Or when you're dealing, we saw the tragedy of Flint, Michigan, which is going to be, which is going to afflict an entire generation for all their lives, is that we saw what happens if we leave the safety of our water, the most basic resource that all humans need. What if we just make the criterion for that, what is the cheapest solution, not what is the safest, most secure solution? The impacts are catastrophic.
And it will reduce America to a kind of third world nation in terms of basic needs, healthcare, housing, water supply, just the things that we need, because there is a bigger crisis coming down the road, aside from another pandemic, which is inevitable. But that is the climate crisis, mass migration, and the fact that the planet is getting warmer and that the weather systems are changing to the point that now we have extreme weather. I mean, the tornadoes in Florida just this last week were unprecedented. And yet, I've seen these kind of newscasters reporting on these stories, standing in the middle of these crazy weather systems and not mentioning climate change because they're, the bosses at their media organizations, they don't care for it. It doesn't sell well. It's not, it's not good for business. I mean, that is also going to be the next big problem. Once we've dealt with the short-term fascism issue and this playbook, we then have to deal with the fact that the US has completely dropped the ball when it comes to preparing for the climate crisis.
Absolutely. And this plan would not only prevent progress from being made on climate during the next administration, but if it were possible to have an administration that is the opposite afterwards, and if Donald Trump is reelected, I think it is legitimately in question whether there would be the opportunity 4 years later to elect a different type of leader. But even if it were, the changes made in this plan would make it so difficult for any future administration to fix what had been done. If you get rid of all the climate scientists at the EPA, it's not like you can just have them back in a moment. If you get rid of the infrastructure of the science that we have been using to try to study climate, you can't just have that back in a moment. And they're seeking to take away all of the clean energy investments that have been made in the Inflation Reduction Act. In their section at the Department of Energy, which starts around page 363, they want to take away the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. They want to assert federal authority over states to prevent states from imposing their own guidelines. This is specifically aimed at California, which is seeking to have to set its own carbon emission standards. This next administration, a Trump second administration, would step in the way of that. So much for state rights, and they are looking to get rid of NOAA, the agency that studies climate, fire all those scientists, and heavily invest in drilling and subsidizing fossil fuel industries.
Yeah. It's very oil rich, this whole playbook. I should just say finally that, this plan is not something like over 4 or 8 years. This has a kind of 180-day attachment to it. They say the time is short and conservatives need a plan. The project will create a playbook of actions to be taken in the first 180 days of the new administration to bring quick relief to the Americans suffering from the left's devastating policies. I mean, there it is in black and white, the Project 2025. We encourage everybody to look at it, project2025.org, and to recognize that, this is, as was predicted, when fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. Allan Piper, thank you very much for joining us and helping us to expose and explain the details of Project 2025.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for helping call attention to this.
My thanks to Allan Piper, and I would very much like for you to visit and support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can download and subscribe to the 5 Minute News podcast and also my series Explained. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.